Elon Musk has been angrily tweeting a lot about activist judges lately. But one of those activist judges, one that he had called out by name, just bested him at the Supreme Court. So that is what we are talking about today. We are talking about what has happened, what will happen from here, and most importantly, why was I right? Why was I correct? Welcome to the Carly P. Riley Show. I'm Carly P. Riley. Let's take a look, first and foremost, what happened?
The U.S. Supreme Court upholding a judge's order that could force the Trump administration to resume foreign aid payments.
Yes, so the U.S. Supreme Court, in their first ruling on any of the lawsuits related to Trump's executive orders, essentially stood by, there's some caveats here, but stood by a district judge in D.C., Judge Amir Ali, and have granted Amir Ali's right to force the Trump administration to pay out $2 billion in payments by USAID that they had previously frozen. And this flies in the face of Elon Musk, who has been very active lately in tweeting about all the problems that these activist judges are posing. So for example, Elon had tweeted, "Democracy in America is being destroyed by judicial coup. An activist judge is not a real judge." He tweeted at another point, "If any judge anywhere can block every presidential order everywhere, we do not have democracy. We have tyranny of the judiciary." And he had attacked this one judge in particular, Judge Amir Ali. He had tweeted, "When judges egregiously undermine the democratic will of the people, they must be fired or democracy dies." And this was Elon Musk retweeting and responding to a Tennessee congressperson who had said, "I'm drafting articles of impeachment for U.S. District Judge Amir H. Ali, yet another partisan activist attempting to weaponize his position to block President Trump from cutting wasteful foreign funding." Now, what is so interesting about this is, what does Elon mean by activist judge? Well, presumably he means a judge that is partisan, a judge who is not acting based on what is best for the public or in accordance with the Constitution or rule of law. He is simply a judge who wants to further some sort of political, ideological, partisan narrative. Now, ironically, Elon tends to ascribe the label of activist judge to any judge who does not agree with him and Trump. And of course, if judges have to agree with him and Trump in order to be in Elon's good graces, I mean, that is the definition of partisanship. But you know what? It's possible. Maybe it's just a coincidence that all of the judges that Elon says are activists are judges that do what he doesn't want. Maybe they really are activist judges. Or at least that theory would have held more weight until the Supreme Court essentially sided with Judge Amir Ali, one of these judges that Elon Musk and this Tennessee congressman claim is just a partisan activist. But now you have these conservative Supreme Court, the Supreme Court in which 33% of the justices on the court were nominated by current President Donald Trump. They have sided, effectively, with Judge Amir Ali. Now, I hate to say I told you so, but I did tweet a few days ago, I think even before we maybe realized the Supreme Court was looking at this specific case, but I can't remember. I tweeted, "My take is that even this Supreme Court will find the actions regarding USAID illegal, but you never know." I had also said this on a recent episode of the podcast. I believe strongly, having looked into this with no preconceived notions, that courts will find this to be illegal. But I do want to talk about some of the caveats. So let's talk about these caveats, because the truth is the Supreme Court in this 5-4 decision, they basically just passed the power back down to the district court. They didn't really take a strong stance on anything except saying, hey, we are not going to, and I'm going to get some of these specific terms wrong, but like, we're not going to vacate what the district judge has said to do. This is where you have to remember, I'm not a lawyer. I can at a layman's level understand what is going on, but I'm going to get some of the specific semantic terminology wrong. But basically the Supreme Court was like, we put the power back in Judge Amir Ali's hands to do what he wants. And this is actually very important, and I'll talk about why. At the heart of this case is a question around the separation of powers. How much power does the executive branch have? How much power does the legislative branch have? How much power does the judicial branch have? And this has been something that has come up quite a lot, because you've had this situation where the executive branch and the Trump administration via DOJ has been freezing funding. So they froze all of the payments out of USAID, for example. Now, as we've talked about before, Congress has the power of the purse. Congress has the power to determine what money gets spent, and the executive branch is required to take care, this is language is in the Constitution, take care to make sure that the laws are faithfully executed as they've been written by Congress. This has been interpreted to mean including making sure that funds that have been appropriated by Congress actually get spent. And there's been additional laws that have been passed in the 1970s saying that the president cannot impound funds. He cannot stop funding from going out, funding that Congress has said that needs to go out. Okay. So that is fundamentally the case being made by the plaintiffs, the NGOs who in this case sued the Trump administration over the fact that they froze $2 billion and more in payments out of USAID. But what's interesting is the Trump administration did not argue against any of those pieces directly. They did not claim that the president can, in fact, impound funds. They did not claim that the president doesn't have to spend money appropriated by Congress. I'm sure, in no small part, because the Trump administration and their lawyers, who are very smart, realize they're not going to get anywhere on those arguments. This is pretty settled law. So what they were trying to do was trying to circumvent the Impoundment Control Act, some of the laws that I just described, by taking a slightly different tact. So what the Trump administration was arguing was A, that this foreign aid spending falls under foreign policy and that the executive branch has a lot of power, which is true, around foreign policy. But more importantly, they were arguing that a district court judge, Judge Amir in this case, does not have the power to force the government to pay out $2 billion. Now, part of this argument was you have a couple of nonprofits who have brought this lawsuit against us. Now, Judge Amir may be able to force us to pay out funds to those specific nonprofits who are bringing this lawsuit, for example, but he does not have the power to, on the basis of these couple of lawsuits brought by these couple of people, tell us we need to pay out all of the money to all of the NGOs, to all of the groups who say we owe them money up to this point, or who we do owe money to up to this point. All of this is not about money. It's not about freezing future funding. This is all a fight over, does the Trump administration need to pay out money that has already been contractually obligated and the work has already been done? The Trump administration is saying, as part of their argument, he cannot, Judge Amir Ali, this district court judge, cannot force us to pay out all $2 billion that it is claimed we are owed to all of these NGOs. That is overreach of his power. And so that fundamentally is what the Supreme Court was looking at most recently. There are still a lot of components of this case that need to be worked out. They need to be worked out on their merits, the limits of the president's control or not, or whatever. That all hasn't been worked out. This is just a decision about whether this district judge has the right to force the Trump administration to pay out this $2 billion. So the fact that the Supreme Court has basically said, yes, the district judge does have this right, is a pretty big deal, because this is an even narrower, smaller issue than some of the bigger issues that are going to be faced in this whole case. And I personally think this therefore bodes pretty well for the bigger questions that will be faced in this case around the separation of powers. Now, the conservatives are displeased with this. And of course, none of them are saying that this is fundamentally about a separation of powers. They're not saying that this is fundamentally about the Impoundment Control Act. Again, that is settled law. No honest, even conservative, is going to pretend that the president has the power to impound funds. But here's Ben Shapiro, for example, talking about why he is so displeased with this.
As Justice Alito says, if the effect of the order is to force the federal government to disperse funds it can't get back before the adjudication at the Supreme Court level, then that is a massive problem.
Ben is obviously a Republican. He is somebody who believes in smaller, more limited government. And so for him, there's a massive problem in the idea that this district judge can force the government to pay out $2 billion in funding to these NGOs and to everything else before the case itself, this fundamental case about what is going on with USAID, has even been heard by the Supreme Court. But here's the thing. If the reverse had been true, if the Supreme Court had decided district judges don't have the power to do this, to force the Trump administration, for example, to pay out $2 billion, here's what this would mean functionally. It would mean that the Impoundment Control Act, while still in effect, would be significantly gutted or significantly reduced in the impact it can have. And here's why. If the Trump administration could force every individual NGO that they owe money to, or across the government, everybody who the government owes money to, if they were all forced to individually bring their case to the government to beg for funding, and the government could then delay giving that funding through all sorts of different court tactics and legal tactics and this and that, it would create a dynamic in which the executive branch would have a tremendous amount of power to effectively stop paying anyone they want to stop paying. Because they could delay it through these court orders, they would put an onerous burden on the groups to try and get their money. And all of that, again, creates a dynamic in which effectively the executive branch can control what groups do and do not get money, versus that power remaining with Congress. And for me, as somebody who really likes the separation of power, does not want to see too much power consolidated within the executive branch, is more than happy to have Congress hold the purse strings. This is a win for me. If you are a super small government conservative, as Ben Shapiro is, I understand. That's your prerogative. That is why for somebody like him, this is a loss. But what is frustrating to me is the semantic thing that the conservatives are doing, saying this is really just about the power of a district judge, when fundamentally, no. What we are talking about is we're talking about gutting the Impoundment Control Act. If you let this, something like this, if you don't give district judges this kind of power, you are effectively defanging this law. And frankly, you're defanging, in my opinion, what exists in the Constitution, this take care clause of the Constitution, which gives Congress this power and forces the executive to faithfully enact the laws as they are passed by Congress. So personally, I am pleased with this decision. You had two conservative justices, Justice Roberts and Justice Amy Coney Barrett, siding with the liberals in order for this ruling to have existed the way it did. To summarize here, I mean, this, first and foremost, it curbs executive power, which to me is a good sign that this Supreme Court will uphold various separation of powers that I believe in. It shows that the Supreme Court, even this conservative 6-3 Trump-appointed Supreme Court, is not going to just rubber stamp anything the president wants to do and to achieve, which I think is a excellent thing. You want an independent judiciary. That is fantastic. And finally, it flies in the face of this narrative that Elon Musk has been sowing on Twitter, which is to undermine faith in our judiciary, claiming that all of these judges are simply activist judges, when in fact, clearly, you have the Supreme Court, loosely speaking, siding with Amir Ali. I keep giving that caveat because it's not like they've said they think what Amir Ali decided was correct, but they have said that Amir Ali has the right to decide that way. So that's a little bit of a semantic difference. But this is a repudiation of Elon's frequent efforts to suggest that anyone who won't just go along with the Trump administration is inherently an activist judge. In any case, that is our show for today. I hope you did enjoy. If you did, please leave a comment below. If you're listening to this on the podcast, tweet at me, come to YouTube, leave a comment. Would love to hear what you're thinking. And with that, see you next time.